Hi, hello, YouTube community. Wow, hair just flew through the air. Hi, and welcome back to my channel. I just wanted to do a quick video on a topic that I think is very important because it's honestly one of the more common mistakes that I see a lot of horse people making and one of the more common myths that I see perpetuated. And it surrounds the idea of desensitization. I see a lot of people calling instances where they essentially chase their horse with the thing they're afraid of, they call that desensitization, when in reality what they're doing is flooding, because they're not actually exposing the horse to the stimulus in an effort to get them less scared. They're chasing them with it and advancing too quickly with what the horse is afraid of, and resulting in the horse running and wanting to get away, or like flinching and just being scared. And then the horse's only option really is to like give in and freeze and shut down, or to continue escalating the stress to such a level that they can become injured due to like a massive flight response. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this is because I think a lot of horse people are are well intentioned, and they're not necessarily doing that in an effort to cause harm to their horse or to scare them, but it's what they think is correct. And it just shows a fundamental lack of understanding with learning theory and behavioral science and the science behind how animals learn. So I wanted to encourage people to like think of your own fears. Like, what are you most afraid of? Like, especially like if you're afraid of insects, or if you're afraid of heights, or if you have like tryptophobia or something. Think about what you're most afraid of, and think about if in an effort to help you get over that fear, someone you trusted, one of your friends, just like randomly exposed you to what you're afraid of at full intensity. So if you're afraid of spiders, throwing a box of spiders on you, locking you in like a small glass box with spiders. I'm terrified of moths. Locking me in a room full of moths, I would literally have a panic attack and probably pass out. So that's what flooding is. You're exposing the animal to something that they're afraid of at a high intensity, and you're inciting fear. And let me remind you, the goal of desensitization is to make your horse less sensitized to a stimulus. So like a plastic bag or whatever they're afraid of, that's the stimulus. The goal of desensitization is to not have them be sensitized, meaning you don't want them to have a reaction. You want to teach them to generalize and deal with the thing that they're afraid of. So in what world does it make more sense to intentionally incite higher levels of fear by advancing too quickly in the training and causing your horse to react heavily? It doesn't make any sense, because then you're first escalating how afraid the animal is of the thing, and then expecting them to then get over that fear. It contradicts itself, you know? So that's kind of the way I want people to view it. In order to get your horse, like if your horse is afraid of plastic bags, or if they have issues with clipping, etc., like you have to introduce it in steps. So if they're afraid of the plastic bag, even at a distance, stand at a distance that they're comfortable at, and then reward them and counter condition the fear associated with the bag. So you hold the bag at a distance where the horse can watch it and be alert, but they're not panicking, and then you can reward them. And gradually, as the horse gets more comfortable and starts to realize that, like, hey, this bag isn't scaring me as much anymore, you can start coming closer and closer until you're getting to the point where you're eventually able to touch the horse with the bag, and then rub them with the bag, and then get them used to like walking over a tarp, having the tarp on them, and so on and so forth. Or with something like clippers, if the horse is afraid of the clipper noise without the clippers anywhere near them, it's completely unreasonable to try to introduce that at the full intensity and just start clipping the horse. You first have to get them used to the noise at a distance that they're okay with, get them comfortable with hearing the noise, and then gradually get them used to having clippers closer and closer. And then eventually you need to get them used to the vibration. So when I teach horses how to clip, I'll either take the blades off, or I just touch like the main handle part of the clippers to the horse so they can feel the vibration, but not actually be clipping them once they're at that stage. But it's little steps, and the thing is, the little steps feel like you're not moving as fast, when in reality you actually get to the end goal quicker, or at the very least you get there without as many fallout behaviors. Because if you're teaching your horse to shut down and internalize fear rather than actually helping them constructively deal with it, then you're not giving them the chance to let down and like learn that they can trust you, and that you're not going to overface them, and that they're not going to be forced to engage in activities that absolutely terrify them. And then you get further ahead, because in situations where you can't control the environment to the same degree, your horse is more willing to trust your judgment of the stimulus and whether or not it's safe, and despite their fear, do what they need to do, like staying calm or like having to deal with something scary and trusting you without exploding. They're far more likely to do that. Whereas a shut down horse can eventually hit a point where something finally sends them over threshold and they kind of wake up out of their learned helplessness and just they lose their fucking shit. And these are horses that people label as dangerous because they explode out of nowhere when really they've had a lot of triggers stacked. And desensitization we do all the time with horses because horses are natural neophobes. Neophobe is like being afraid of new things. They are naturally nervous around new things because as a flight animal, it could be a potential threat. They have to gauge the level of threat. And they also, when orientation of objects rotates, they don't have the ability to recognize that it's the same object at a different angle like we do. So with like a tree, for example, or a bush, we've seen trees and we just go tree, even if it's a different type of tree. Like we go, oh, that's a tree. They look at it at all different angles and they'll be like, oh, it's scary at this angle. So it might seem like they've seen it 1,000 times, but it could have moved slightly and they notice very little things. So in order to overcome that neophobia, the best way of doing it is building a relationship with your horse where they feel safe around you because you introduce them to things at their own pace. And then they're more willing to do things for you and it makes them way safer to handle as a result because they're less inclined to panic or just shut down. Like they're participating actively in the session with you. And unfortunately on TikTok, I see so much flooding called desensitization and it's framing it completely wrong. And I think it's really important that this basic skill people understand and actually consider how it works. Because if we apply it to ourselves and consider how we'd feel doing the same thing, like not literally getting touched with a bag, but like something that incites that level of fear in you, none of us would want to be flooded. And those people who would be like, oh, that's what my parents did or whatever, then they're just like, they were abused by their parents and in denial of that. Like it's not okay to like scare the shit out of an animal in the name of trying to get them less scared of things. It makes no sense. Like when you say it out loud like that, it makes absolutely no sense. So yeah, that's what I want people to consider is like desensitization. The goal is to have the horse not be afraid of things. Why in the world would you incite flight reactions and fear responses and just continue pushing on at the same intensity if you're trying to teach the horse that the thing is not scary? You want them to view it as like okay and ignore it, and the best way to do that is by showing them that they are safe, because let me remind you, they are a flight animal, which means they flee from scary things as their defense mechanism. If you want to override what is an instinctual response, the best way to do it is by providing a safe place for your horse. And since we take our horses places, we need to become that safe place because we go with them everywhere. And if they feel safe with us, they're a lot less likely to behave dangerously. Even just recently at the Shauna Karish clinic, unfortunately, we did not get it on video, but when I was walking Banksy down to the arena for his first session, he has to walk back like down a path and then around the barn where the rest of the clinic horses were, and then past like 2 other barns, and then they turn and there's the arena, and then there's all these fields full of horses behind it. But anyways, when we were walking down from his paddock, there's like this tunnel of like draining water, so it was like a creek and it was making a lot of noise. And when we came in, he was a little nervous of that. He took like a look at it and he was just like, okay, and we walked right by it. But there is this really cute little Icelandic pony named Loki, and he popped his head over the stall, but he was so short that it was just a head, and when Banksy saw it, it sent him over threshold and he had a flight response. But the difference is, instead of like turning and bolting or like completely losing their marbles like a lot of horses would, all he did is like gracefully had a beautiful rear, and then was like, he gracefully had a lovely rear and then like came back down and was able to continue walking on with me and follow Janae and Percy. And even though he was still nervous after that occurrence, he returned to like a baseline level of manageable stress where he's not actively spooking, despite the fact that on our way down to the arena, so many more triggers continued to stack that could potentially worry him. So that's because of like the rapport and the relationship that I've built with him through how I've introduced him to things, especially like I'm fortunate that I've had him since he's a baby. So he trusts my perception of things and he's more likely to come to me for comfort. And and start to relax, which like his level of stress at the clinic, especially the first day, and like the herd boundness to Percy, it was quite high, and like a lot of horses would be explosive and dangerous at that point. But even when we turned him at liberty, like he was like, especially for a baby, like calm and collected, and when he had moments, they were just moments, and then he'd bring himself back down and at least make the effort to settle. And like I also just had him in like a flat leather halter, and like he could have been so much more, especially for a youngster his age. I see people justifying far worse behaviors, and they'll be getting mad at the horse, and the horse is already in harsher equipment. And it's things that could be avoided depending on how you go about it. And obviously they can't always be avoided because Banksy even reared, as I said, on the way down to the clinic. But like if you build that relationship with your horse, it does make them way easier to deal with, and it also helps them get over things a lot faster, so that you're not going to run into like conflict behaviors where the horse has been introduced to something too quickly. So when they see like other instances of scary things that closely resemble what you desensitize them to, they might not generalize them in the same way as the thing that you initially were, like the actual object or whatever it was that you were using. And they might respond randomly, and they might have erratic behaviors where they seemingly like react without warning, because they'll be in freeze response, they'll be shut down, and they'll just be standing, and then they'll randomly like wake up and have the flight response then, which makes them really, really dangerous because they're harder to read and they're harder to stop. So that's kind of what I would like for people to consider when they're referencing what desensitization is. I think it's very important that we accurately represent the scientific terms and like behavioral science, and actually consider logically the situation that is happening. Like even without a behavioral science background, I think the way everyone should look at it with any animal is, if our goal is to teach them not to be afraid, why would we get them more scared first? That sets us further back, right? So view it that way at the bare minimum. And I think that's the best way of putting it, and I hope that this was helpful.